The pitch of the twin turbofans outside the scratched acrylic window didn't match our altitude, and the cabin was entirely too quiet. I had given her the window seat 3 hours ago in Denver, mostly because when she first looked at the middle seat between me and the aisle, her fingers had closed around the armrest before she could stop them. Now the plane was banking hard to the left, leveling out at 10,000 feet, and she was looking right at me. Her expression was perfectly polite, a calm mask of mild inquiry, but her thumb was pressing a sharp, permanent crease into the rim of her plastic water cup. She didn't realize she was crushing it. That was the first wrong detail. The second was the fact that my phone, briefly catching a tower signal from the ground, vibrated with an automated flight diversion alert before the pilot even keyed his microphone. "We're not going to Seattle, are we?" she stated. It wasn't a question. Her voice was steady, pitched just under the hum of the engine, but the edges of it were frayed. "No," I said. I didn't sugarcoat it. I never do. "Flaps are down. We're in a holding pattern. They're probably diverting us to Portland due to the weather cell over the Cascades." She held my gaze for a long second, searching my face for a joke. I'd spent 12 years reading bent metal and flight data recordings. People were harder because they kept moving while the evidence changed. The first rule at a wreckage field is simple. The map is never the terrain. Trust what's in front of you. In front of me was a woman in a pink cardigan watching her career disintegrate. The PA system crackled to life. The captain confirmed it. Severe crosswinds. Portland diversion. We would be on the ground in 20 minutes. Maeve let out a slow, measured breath. She opened the tray table and placed the ruined plastic cup on it, smoothing the crease with her index finger. It didn't pop back into shape. It just sat there, a broken piece of plastic, bearing the physical weight of her stress. "I have a forced transfer to a ferry in Anacortes at 5 o'clock, she said. The words came out in the clipped order of a project brief. "If I miss it, the island resort cancels the non-refundable deposit for the architecture retreat, $6,000. My firm's managing partner, Adrian Vale, is waiting there to review my portfolio for the residential division. If I miss the review, the position goes to someone already in Seattle." I looked at the plastic cup. I didn't offer a platitude about it working out. False hope is just a lie dressed up as comfort. "Portland is a 3-hour drive from Seattle on a clear day," I said, keeping my tone level. "Today is not a clear day." "I know." She folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles white. "I designed the coastal weather station out there. It's pulling gusts at 60 miles per hour. We hit the tarmac hard. The tires screeched, fighting for grip on the wet concrete. By the time we reached the gate, the terminal was a chaotic sea of stranded passengers. The airline representative at the podium looked like he wanted to crawl under the carpet and disappear. Flights were grounded up and down the coast. The departure board flashed a relentless, unforgiving red. Canceled, delayed, canceled. I needed to reach a cargo runway excursion outside Boeing Field by morning. My supervisor, Mara Bell, had texted the coordinates and evidence deadline. I didn't have time for a detour, but I also didn't have a choice. You can't argue with atmospheric pressure. I walked toward the customer service desk. Maeve was 3 steps ahead of me, her phone pressed to her ear. She moved through the crowd with the clean economy of someone who had directed contractors through a collapsing schedule. Her shoulders stayed rigid, but every time a passenger blocked her path, she found the next opening without raising her voice. We ended up in the same endless line. The terminal elevator chimed every time its doors opened. Bing bong! The sound arrived a full second late, a tiny failure that grated on me. In my line of work, 1 second can separate a safe landing from a debris field. At the desk, the operations coordinator's badge read Lena Ortiz. She listened to 3 passengers, then turned to Maeve. "Don't wait for a rebook. The northbound ferry schedule is collapsing. I can issue a diversion record with the landing time and weather code. It won't force the resort to refund you, but it proves the delay wasn't voluntary." Maeve placed her phone on the counter. "I'll take the record. Hold the earliest direct return flight, too. Tomorrow at 4:20. Maeve nodded. A document was not a solution, but it could become evidence. I checked my watch. 2:10 p.m. They're going to tell you they can't rebook you until tomorrow afternoon, I told her, stepping up to the stanchion beside her. She lowered her phone. The battery icon was bleeding into the red. The rental car agencies are completely tapped out. I checked the apps while we were taxiing. Everything is gone. There isn't a sedan, an SUV, or a compact left in the entire city. Not everything, I said. I pulled my tablet from my heavy canvas bag and opened Mara Bell's field assignment. The NTSB had reserved a Ford F-250 at an approved industrial lot for the Boeing field inspection. The dispatch record showed the vehicle, the insurance code, and the return window. I called Mara before touching the reservation. "Tell me you're not borrowing an agency truck for a personal rescue," she said when she answered. "I have a passenger whose destination is on my route. I still reach the crash site by the evidence window. I need confirmation that the vehicle can be signed out under the assignment." There was a pause filled with keyboard clicks. "The north route is already in your field plan. The truck is approved. Log the mileage, keep the case sealed, and send me the diversion record." "Understood." Only then did I turn the tablet toward Maeve. "I have a field vehicle secured at a heavy machinery lot a mile from here. I'm driving north, and I can take you as far as Everett if the route remains open." She looked at the screen, then at me. We were strangers, but the clock was ticking and the map was failing her. "I need to get to the Anacortes ferry terminal," she said, her voice tight. "I'm passing through Everett," I said. "It's on the way. The weather is worsening, and the service road will be rough. Do you want to come with me, or would you rather wait for Lena's protected rebooking?" Maeve looked at the departure board, then at the red battery line on her phone. She picked up her bag. The leather creaked in her grip. "Lead the way." We took an airport shuttle to the industrial lot. The white Ford F-250 smelled of vinyl, damp metal, and industrial cleaner. The lot supervisor, Carlos Mendez, checked my dispatch code and odometer before handing me the keys. "Keep the passenger belted," he said. "That ridge is ugly in rain." I showed him the closure advisory. "If we divert, I'll update the route log." I threw my Pelican case of inspection tools into the steel bed, locking the tonneau cover with a heavy snap. Maeve opened the passenger door and placed her leather bag on the floorboard with careful, deliberate precision. Before I started the engine, I handed her a reflective vest from the rear seat. "If we stop on the shoulder, put this on before you open the door." "You carry a vest for every possible disaster?" "Only the ones that have happened before." Her mouth moved as if she had almost smiled. That is not reassuring. The rain started hitting the windshield in heavy, diagonal sheets as we merged onto I-5 North. The silence in the cab was thick, heavy with the weight of the ticking clock. Usually, people try to fill the space with nervous chatter. They ask where you're from, what you do, what your favorite color is. I hate nervous chatter. I prefer the steady, predictable hum of the tires against the wet asphalt. For the first 40 miles, she didn't speak. She just watched the gray landscape blur past. Her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on the taillights ahead. "You can turn the heat up if you want," I said, keeping my focus on the road. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice shivered slightly. She shook her head. "The windshield is already fogging." I reached over and bumped the dial up 2 notches, then switched on the lower vents. A few minutes later, her shoulders dropped an inch as the warm air reached her hands. She held them over the vent without comment. I didn't point it out. I just let the heater do its work. By the time we hit the outskirts of Tacoma, traffic ground to a dead mechanical halt. Red brake lights stretched for miles into the rain, a glowing river of stalled metal. The radio crackled with a local news bulletin. A jackknifed semi had blocked all northbound lanes. Hazmat crews were on site. Maeve checked her phone. The screen cast a pale light across her face. "The ferry leaves in 3 hours. We're 50 miles away." "We're not going to make it by 5, I said. It wasn't cruelty, it was just a fact. She closed her eyes. The corner of her phone dug into her palm until the case creaked. If I'm not on that island by tonight, I lose the portfolio review. It's the partner track, Finn. It's everything I've worked for over the last 10 years. every late night, every compromised weekend. I put the truck in park. The engine idled with a low rumble. The rain hammered the steel roof, sounding like gravel thrown against a tin can. I looked at the GPS on the dashboard. The red line of traffic extended indefinitely, a solid block of failure. "The map is never the terrain," I murmured, mostly to myself. She opened her eyes, turning her head sharply. "What?" "Something an old investigator taught me," I said. I reached over and popped open the center console, pulling out a physical, spiral-bound road atlas. I don't trust screens when systems fail. Batteries die, satellites lose lock. I trust paper, I trust contour lines. I flipped it open to the Puget Sound region, spreading it across the wide center console. "The system says this is the only way. The system is looking at the highway, at the path of least resistance. We need to look at the dirt." I handed her the atlas. I pointed a blunt finger at a thin gray line winding through the green topographical shading of the foothills. "Service road, logging route. It bypasses the highway closure and drops out near Snohomish. But I need a navigator. I can't read this and drive a heavy truck in the mud at the same time." She looked at the map. I could see the exact moment the architect in her took over. The panic receded, replaced by cold, spatial logic. She traced the line with her nail, her eyes tracking the elevation changes. "It intersects with State Route 9. If we can cross the ridge without getting stuck, we save 40 minutes. "Can you call out the turns?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Her voice was completely different now. Crisp, certain, grounded. I wrestled the heavy truck off the highway, ignoring the honks of stranded commuters as I took the muddy shoulder to the nearest exit ramp. We hit the service road 10 minutes later. It was brutal. Deep, water-filled ruts, washed-out gravel, and rain turning the dirt into a slick, unpredictable soup. I kept both hands firmly on the wheel, working the lower gears, feeling the slip and catch of the heavy tires as they fought for purchase. Maeve was a machine. She held the atlas flat on her lap, bracing herself against the dashboard with one hand as the truck bucked over a washed-out route. "Half a mile, there's a fork in the trees. Keep right, the left goes to a dead-end quarry drop-off." She had marked the turns with the stub of a carpenter's pencil she found in the door pocket. At the next fork, she compared the contour lines with the angle of the ridgeline outside her window. "The printed road is older than the cut through the trees," she said. "The drainage channel is new. Take the higher shoulder, but keep the rear wheels away from the soft edge." I glanced at her. "You read a landscape like a plan set?" "I read where the water wants to go. Buildings fail when people pretend it wants something else." The sentence stayed with me longer than the turn. "Copy that," I said. We fell into a rhythm. She called the route, analyzing the curves and the distance, and I drove the machine. It was a comfortable, shared silence broken only by necessary data. I didn't ask about her feelings, and she didn't ask about mine. We were just two people actively working a problem, side by side. At one point, the back end of the truck hit a patch of wet clay and fishtailed hard toward a steep embankment. I stayed off the brake, steered sharply into the slide, and feathered the gas until the tires bit into the gravel again. The truck snapped back into a straight line. Maeve let out a sudden, sharp laugh. It startled both of us. She slapped the atlas once against her knee, then looked out at the embankment we had missed by less than a truck length. The laugh broke the tension, and the air in the cab turned lighter. We broke out onto the paved surface of State Route 9 an hour later, leaving the traffic jam miles behind us in the foothills. I wiped a layer of condensation off the inside of my window with the back of my hand. "That was incredible," she said, closing the atlas and running a hand through her hair. "You're a good navigator," I said. The words were small, but I watched her fold them away instead of dismissing them. By the time we reached the Anacortes terminal, the digital clock on the dash read 5:15 p.m. The dock was empty. The water in the slip was churning, but the massive white ferry was already a gray shape on the horizon, cutting through the chop toward the islands. Maeve stood in the rain outside the truck, looking out at the empty slip. The wind whipped her cardigan around her waist. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She read the email from Adrian Vale once, then turned the screen face down on the hood. The resort had canceled the deposit, and the review was officially closed. I stood a few feet away, rain soaking into the shoulders of my Henley. My hand went toward her shoulder, stopped, and returned to my pocket. I knew how to shore up a collapsed fuselage. People didn't come with braces or load limits. "I'm sorry," I said. She pocketed her phone. Her chin lifted once, then dropped as the wind pulled at her hair. "It's not your fault. Finn, you did everything you could." I checked my watch. The weather was worsening, the sky turning a bruised purple. "The terminal office is closed. The hotel across the street has a vacancy sign flickering in the window. We should secure a room before the rest of the stranded passengers get here." We walked into the motel lobby. It smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and damp wool. The front desk clerk's badge said, "Jonah Price." He checked the tablet while rain dragged across the windows. "One room left," Jonah said. "Single queen. The elevator works, but its chime is delayed. Don't mistake it for a door opening." The two-tone sound answered him from the hall. Bing bong. A second late. Maeve glanced at me. "Of course it is." "A delayed warning is still a warning," I said. Maeve looked at me, fingers wrapped around the crushed cup. "Take it. You have a job tomorrow. I'll sleep in the truck." "No, you won't sleep in a freezing truck." I looked at Jonah. "We'll take it. Chair for me. Put the arrangement on the receipt." Maeve's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to decide the room rules by yourself." I put the card back in my wallet. "You're right. Do you want the room? Or should we wait for Lena's rebooking desk to reopen?" She looked at the storm, then at the chair described on the motel brochure. "The room. Chair for you. Door stays unlocked until we're inside and both agree." "Agreed." Only then did I hand Jonah the card. We walked silently down the exterior concrete corridor to room 114. The wind howled off the water, rattling the thin door in its frame. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. It was clean but cramped, one bed taking up most of the space, one armchair shoved in the corner, a small, scuffed desk. I set her heavy leather bag on the wooden luggage rack. "I'll take the chair." "Finn, you can't sleep in that chair. You're 6'2". You'll ruin your back." "I've slept on aluminum cargo pallets in the back of a C-130, I said, unzipping my jacket. "The chair is a luxury." She found a spare blanket in the closet and dropped it over the chair before I could object. "Then use the luxury properly." I held up both hands. "I didn't ask for that." "You didn't have to. You were about to pretend cold was a professional credential." The corner of my mouth moved before I could stop it. She saw it and looked away as if she had not. She sat on the edge of the bed. The drive had left a tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out the crushed plastic cup from the airplane and set it on the nightstand. It was a useless piece of garbage, but she adjusted it until it sat perfectly centered on the cheap cardboard coaster. "I don't even like the firm," she said quietly, staring at the ruined cup. I stopped unlacing my boots. I stayed kneeling on the carpet and looked up at her. "I've spent 10 years building boxes for a firm that designs concrete boxes," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to build residential, wood and glass, homes that breathe. But the partner track was the map. I just kept following the map." "The map is never the terrain," I repeated quietly, the words feeling heavier now. She nodded, a small, tight motion. "I just paid $6,000 to fail at something I didn't want to do." The soft reassurance waited behind my teeth and refused to sound like me. Instead, my brain retrieved the wrong memory entirely. "When I got my first lead investigator badge," I said, keeping my voice level, "I was standing in a muddy field in Ohio. A small, twin-engine plane went down. I was so focused on filing the preliminary structural report correctly that I didn't look up at the sky. I don't recall the specific cause of the crash right now. I recall the AC rattling in the rental car and thinking I should have eaten breakfast." She looked at me, confusion mingling with the exhaustion in her eyes. "My point is," I said, carefully placing my boots neatly by the door. Sometimes the failure is the thing that makes you look at the actual terrain. I walked over to the small kitchenette and turned on the cheap coffee maker. The machine clicked, hissed, and began producing coffee that smelled better than it tasted. I texted Maeve my location and the new evidence window. Her response arrived within a minute. Take the morning. Document everything. Don't turn the passenger into another case file. I read the last sentence twice. Maeve had turned toward the window, but I could see her listening. Your supervisor knows you well, she said. She knows what I do when a problem refuses to stay contained. And what do you do? I watch the coffee drip into the glass pot. I make a list. That is not an answer. It's the answer I have. She pulled the second motel cup from the bathroom, rinsed it, and poured herself half of the weak coffee. Then she slid the sugar packets between us. For tonight, make a list that includes sleeping. I added sleep to Mara's field checklist, even though it was not an aviation requirement. The next morning, the storm broke. Sunlight hit the wet pavement outside, making the puddles shine like shattered glass. We walked over to the diner next to the motel for breakfast. I sat across from her in a cracked red vinyl booth. The smell of frying bacon and bleach filled the air. She had a thick folder of paperwork open on the table, the firm's contract, the resort's cancellation policy, her emails, and Lena Ortiz's diversion record. Maeve had arranged the pages by time: original reservation, firm confirmation, amended cancellation link, ferry schedule, weather warning, and her unanswered message to Adrian Vale. They moved the deadline up, she said, tracing a dense paragraph on the paper with a red pen. The contract originally stated a 24-hour grace period for severe weather delays. They amended it via email 2 days ago and hid the change in a link at the bottom. That's how they kept the deposit. I put my coffee mug down. I pulled a blue highlighter out of my jacket pocket. Let me see the amendment. She pushed the stack of paper across the Formica table. I read the clauses twice, marking dates, version numbers, and the exact moment the link had been sent. I didn't have a law degree. I did know how to build a timeline that another professional could audit without taking my word for it. This is a problem for their contract team, I said, capping the highlighter with a sharp click. The amendment was sent after the original booking, buried in a link and never acknowledged by you. I can mark the missing consent and the weather record. A licensed attorney needs to decide what remedy applies. She blinked, leaning forward. Are you sure? I deal with commercial airlines, I said. They taught me to separate what the record proves from what I want it to prove. This record proves the terms changed without a documented acceptance. Maeve took out her phone. Do you know an attorney who will answer on a Sunday? Maribel's office keeps a list of consumer and transportation counsel. I can ask, but you choose whether to call. I sent the timeline to Clara Reed, a Seattle attorney who handled travel and contract disputes. Clara called while the waitress refilled our coffee. Mr. Morgan, she said, I have the weather notice and diversion record. Send the original terms. Amendment and proof the resort knew about the closure. Maeve leaned toward the phone. I can send the reservation, the firm's email, and my message to the resort. I have not signed anything acknowledging the amendment. Good. Don't call the resort again. Let the record stay clean. Send me the files, and I will tell you whether a demand letter is appropriate. Maeve looked at me for the next task. I turned the folder so the pages faced her. You send the documents? I said. I will build the chronology. And if Clara says we have no case? Then we stop pretending the 6,000 can be recovered and decide what the failure is worth teaching us. You say that like you could live with either answer. I can live with facts. I don't always like them. I took out my laptop. For the next hour, I built a factual chronology with timestamps and source labels, while Maeve compiled the emails, weather alerts, contract and diversion record. Clara reviewed the packet, corrected 2 dates, and drafted the demand letter herself, 2 professionals preparing evidence, and a third deciding what it could legally do. I hit print on the portable thermal printer in my gear bag. The paper slid out with a quiet whir. I signed as the preparer of the timeline. Maeve signed the client declaration, and Clara added her electronic signature to the demand letter. "Send Clara's letter to the resort and copy Adrian Vale," I said, sliding the warm document across the table to her. "The letter gives them until noon to respond. After that, Clara decides whether to file with the state consumer office." She looked down at the document. Her thumb stopped worrying the edge of the page. She typed the email with rapid precision, attached the scanned records, and hit send. Then she placed the phone beside the ruined cup and sat straighter. Clara replied before the check arrived. "The record is strong. Wait for their response." Maeve slid the phone toward me. "That is the first good sentence I've seen since Denver." "It is a useful sentence. What good is still under review." She took the last bite of toast and pointed at my plate. "You should eat before you start turning breakfast into evidence." I obeyed. Mara Bell would have called that a successful field adjustment. We checked out 40 hours after the diversion and drove toward Seattle so she could catch a flight home while I headed south to my crash site. Jonah Price printed 2 copies of the receipt and circled the storm surcharge. Lena Ortiz held Maeve's direct seat, but a new closure delayed departure until the following afternoon. The terminal was calmer. The system had not recovered. I called Mara Bell from the truck. "The inspection window is still open," she said. "The cargo operator moved the aircraft to a secure hangar. You have until noon tomorrow to document the gear assembly." "I can make that." "You can make the site. Whether you make the conclusion is why we keep records." Maeve heard the line through the speaker. "Your supervisor sounds like Clara." "That is not a compliment either of them would accept." "Then it is probably accurate." We stood near the security checkpoint. The 2-tone elevator chime echoed in the distance. Bing bong. 1 second behind reality. My fingers tightened around the Pelican case handle, then loosened. The sound still bothered me, but it no longer felt like a threat I had to solve immediately. She held her printed boarding pass. The airline had tried to route her through Dallas on a forced timeline to compensate for the cancellation, but she had rejected it at the counter. She had set her own dates, booking a direct flight home for tomorrow instead. Lena had written the new departure time by hand on the back of the diversion record, a small correction to a system that kept treating her as a passenger instead of a person making a choice. I kept my hands securely in my pockets. I stood exactly an arm's length away. I wanted to reach out and touch her arm, just to steady her in the current of the crowd, but I forced my hands to stay perfectly still. You don't cross boundaries just because you survived a stressful 48 hours together. You wait. "Thank you, Finn," she said, her voice cutting through the terminal noise. "For the map, and for knowing when the letter needed someone else to write it." "Just facts," I said. She looked at her boarding pass, then up at me. The harsh terminal lights reflected in her eyes, but they were bright, clear. The space between us felt suddenly very small, despite the rigid physical distance I was enforcing. She stepped forward, deliberately closing the gap. "Yesterday, you gave me the window seat," she said, her voice carrying a quiet weight. Then she smiled, a small, tired, incredibly warm smile. An hour later, I asked, "Can I borrow your shoulder too?" She didn't wait for an answer. She stepped completely into my space and rested her head against my shoulder for exactly 2 seconds. It was a brief, practical wait, grounding and real. I didn't wrap my arms around her. I didn't push the boundary. I just stood perfectly still, letting myself be the rock she needed for those 2 seconds, feeling the warmth of her presence against the chill of the terminal. Then she pulled back, ripped the boarding pass for the Dallas flight neatly in half, and dropped the pieces in the nearest trash can. She held up the new direct ticket. "I'm going home, and I'm quitting the firm on Monday." "Good," I said. "I'll forward you the email when they refund the money," she said, shouldering her heavy leather bag. "I expect a full report," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly serious. She turned and walked through the security line. I watched her until she disappeared completely around the far corner. Then I picked up my Pelican case, felt the familiar weight of the tools, and went to work. 3 months later, The coffee shop near Pioneer Square smelled of roasted beans and wet pavement. I sat at a corner table, reviewing the final report on the cargo runway excursion. Mara Bell had marked the evidence chain complete. The landing gear failure was a maintenance defect, not pilot error. The bell above the wooden door chimed. I didn't look up immediately. I was tracing the last stress fracture on a tail rotor schematic when a shadow fell over the table, blocking the afternoon light. Maeve stood there. The rigid professional tension had left her shoulders. She wore well-worn jeans and a thick, comfortable sweater. A canvas bag landed on the empty chair across from me. It was not neatly packed for a corporate trip. It overflowed with rolled blueprints, measuring tape, and a small red notebook with her new firm's name stamped across the cover, Carter Residential Studio. "They refunded the $6,000, she said, sitting down. "I know. You emailed me the receipt. Clara sent the final confirmation yesterday. The resort apologized without admitting anything, which is apparently the traditional shape of an apology from a company with lawyers." "Did Adrian Vale respond?" She placed her phone on the table. The screen showed a short email. "We're sorry the review could not proceed. Please return your portfolio materials." "He returned my drawings," she said. "He also offered me a consulting contract after he saw the new studio announcement. I declined the version that required me to use his firm's name. I accepted the version that lets me keep my own." I closed my laptop. "That sounds like a map you chose." "It is a map I drew after I finally looked at the terrain." She reached into her coat pocket and placed a clear plastic water cup in the center of the table. It was identical to the crushed one from the flight, but unbroken. I touched the rim with one finger. The plastic held its shape. "I brought that because I wanted a prop," she said. Then I remembered I hate props. "You planned the meeting anyway." "The meeting is your problem. You investigate things." The laugh arrived quietly, not as a performance. It loosened the tightness behind my ribs. She opened the red notebook and turned it toward me. The first page held a rough site plan for a small coastal housing project: raised foundations, cross-ventilation, storm shutters, a public path above the flood line. Along the margin, she had written a list of questions for a safety consultant. "I need an aviation accident investigator for 1 hour, she said. "Not to save the project, not to tell me what to do. I want someone to review the wind assumptions and tell me where the drawing lies. I will pay your rate." "My rate is unreasonable." "So is the price of building the wrong thing in the wrong place." I read the first page, then the second. The numbers were incomplete, but the intention was sound. She had not brought me a problem because she couldn't handle it. She had brought me a problem because she knew exactly what she wanted from my experience. 1 hour, I said. No promises after that. "I didn't come for a promise." She said it lightly, but her eyes stayed on mine. 3 months earlier, she had stood beside a missed ferry with her career folded into a cancellation email. Now she sat across from me with a firm, a contract, a finished refund, and a decision she had made before walking through the door. I reached for the plastic cup and moved it slightly to the side. Then I rested my hand on the wooden table, palm facing up. I didn't say a word. The space remained hers. Maeve looked at my hand. She didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in mine, her fingers sliding smoothly against my palm. The grip was firm, steady, and entirely real. The two-tone chime of the shop's door echoed behind us as another customer walked in. This time it was perfectly in sync with reality. I waited for the delay that had followed us from the airport, but it never came. Maeve's thumb moved once across the side of my hand. "The map is never the terrain," she said. "Trust what's in front of you." In front of me was her hand, warm against mine. In front of her was the plan she had chosen, not the route someone else had drawn for her. We did not need to name the future to begin walking toward it. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. The right person does not force you back onto an old route. They help you read the facts, choose your direction, and keep your own name on the map. Green flag. Healthy love respects consent, shares practical work and gives both people room to choose without turning protection into control. What would you do if the wrong route led you to the right person? Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.